Hi, I'm Miceal O'Hurley, and you're watching In Conversation This Week. This week, I'm joined by Sam Hartwell, a retired American colonel with an intelligence community background. He's living in Kyiv and has been for the last couple of years. He's plugged in not only from the military perspective, but he is volunteering with NGOs, helping on the humanitarian side as well. So, we're going to be talking to Sam in Kyiv. Stay tuned, you'll find it interesting.
You are watching In Conversation This Week with Miceal O'Hurley.
Sam Hartwell, welcome to the program. How are you today?
Fine, thanks for the opportunity, Mika.
Oh, glad to have you. Are you in Kyiv or are you on the road?
I just arrived in Lviv and I'll be in Kiev day after tomorrow.
For a lot of our viewers, they may not have traveled to Ukraine over the past couple of years since the start of the full-scale invasion. Is there any civilian air travel into Ukraine these days?
No, none. The airports are shut down.
So I take it you either drove across the border, took a bus, or if you're lucky enough, got on a train.
I drive, I have my own car. I live in Kiev, have for 2 years now.
How are the road conditions? They often are a telltale sign of how much aid, munitions, transportation's going across the border. How did you find the roads this time?
Well, there hasn't been any support that I saw very much. I did see one convoy of about 12 civilian trucks, but they were being escorted by police, so it was obvious.
We're talking on the foot of the United States, finally answering President Joe Biden's 6-month-old call for supplemental spending for Ukraine. It's been a long and winding road. It passed in the early hours of the morning through the Senate. How soon do you think that aid will start flowing into Ukraine?
Well, I've only seen what the military in the U.S. and a couple of politicians have said, and they have said that everything is front loaded and moving out of Poland within days. So I suspect they're loading the trucks and the trains right now as we speak.
Sam, we'll get into your background in a minute, but suffice it to say, you're a man who knows what he's talking about. If you were on the ground, what weapon systems would you want to come across the border first?
Well, it's absolutely clear that the anti-missile systems of all types, not just Patriots, the cities are getting pummeled. That would be priority one. Right along with that, though, you need the artillery rounds that they're in desperate need of. But I'd say those are the two high priorities. And then right behind that would be the new long-range HIMARS that I understand was just authorized.
And why are HIMARS so important to Ukraine?
The long range is called the ATACMS, and you've got two types there. One that's good for about 50 miles, but it's essentially like a shotgun round. It can cover an area of about, I believe, a half a kilometer in diameter with tungsten steel rounds, like a shotgun effect. And then you've got the long range single warhead. It'll go up to 300 miles. And so it allows you to target critical logistics nodes, airfields, naval bases, deep into Crimea and farther south in occupied Ukraine.
Is this a game changer for Ukraine? Does it now give Ukraine the lethality to reach deep into its own territory to take out Russian targets in Crimea and in occupied Donbass?
Well, I don't call it a game changer. I don't call anything a game changer, really, but it does allow a strong strategic positive effect when they're used properly to hit those logistics nodes, command nodes, air bases, and such. Now, I should also mention with the F-16s coming in, when that happens, that together with these other weapons packages again, not a game changer, but it certainly, I would think, it stops the Russians in their tracks where things are now, and I would expect some pushback to recover a bit of the lost territory since December when they ran out of ammunition. And I have to say, the Russians, in all that time, with all the superiority and weapons that they have not advanced very far. There's a few spots where they've managed to advance up to about 10 miles maximum since we stopped our support. But that's indicative of a Russian army that's really not that great. So, and you can tell also by the responses from Medvedev and their talking heads that they're really worried. They're upset about this. So.
Sam, the F-16s have been requested for the last 2 years. I remember the first days of the war being on the ground, and the plea from the civilians were close the skies. Ukraine has been in desperate need of fighters. They've gotten a lot from their neighbors. They've fought well above their weight. But what will the F-16s mean for Ukraine?
Yeah, I've spoken with a retired F-16 pilot friend of mine, as well as an old buddy from West Point, although he was in the Air Force Academy. He became a wing commander and a two-star general. What it comes down to, the F-16 versus the Su-35 all depends on training. And the West has always had superior training, usually on average about twice as many flight hours of training before they're considered battle ready than the equivalent Russian pilot. So that, I think, bodes well. Technology, yeah, definitely there's a slight advantage. The AS-400 anti-aircraft system is deadly. And it will depend on Ukraine's ability to suppress their the Russian electronic warfare and radar. If they can suppress the radar and electronic warfare, the F-16s should have a field day, actually. The other advantage of the F-16s, and we didn't talk about this, but on the front lines, the Su-35 has been equipped with these glide bombs that are anywhere from 500 to 1,500 pounds. And those things can, from 20 kilometers away, hit frontline targets. Now, as soon as you have F-16s in the air, then these Su-35s won't be able to get that close. And when you get more of these anti-aircraft missiles like Hawks, not just Patriots, but Hawks as well, you'll be able to do more damage to that Air Force, the Russian Air Force, and keep them away, far enough away from the front line so that they can't use those devastating glide bombs. So I think that's all positive. Again, is it a game changer? No, but 45 F-15s is a considerable amount, but in fact, they would really need about 3 times, preferably 4 times that, 4 wings, so to speak, to establish air superiority, I believe, on the battlefield. With these 45, I think that they could establish air parity, but we'll see.
And Sam, when do you expect the F-16s to come online?
I don't have any privileged information or anything reliable on that. I'd be speculating.
Will they be there for the summer?
I keep reading June.
And now, a brief word from one of our patrons.
Sam, you have a background. I believe you're a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. Is it the class of 81?
Yeah, that's correct. 1981. I was commissioned
So,
military intelligence.
so you'd be a contemporary of the most senior generals that are still serving or have recently retired, whose experiences in combat have been fairly significant given the U.S. Involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan over the past 20 years. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, that's right. I've worked indirectly for the likes of General Hodges, former U.S. Army Europe commander. He was my boss in Afghanistan for one of my tours there. Same with General Petraeus, General McChrystal, and also General Flynn when he was the chief of intel in Afghanistan.
I want to talk about another one of your West Point compatriots, although I think he graduated more than 100 years before you. William Tecumseh Sherman pioneered a kind of warfare during the American Civil War that might be characterized as total warfare. I mean, he really took it to the American Confederacy in the South, going after everything from the armies to their control over waterways to civilian supplies that were sold to feed the Southern military. Why hasn't Russia been able to do the same thing, given their deep economic capacity? The size of the nation dwarfs Ukraine. Why hasn't Russia been able to do more, given the lack of resources Ukraine suffered from over the last 6 months?
Well, I think they are waging total war as best they can, but it's because of the Western support that's been supplied since then that has prevented a total collapse of the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian economy, because the air defense protection that we have thus far provided has done a lot to preserve the infrastructure. Now, over the last 3 months, it hasn't been that way. And it's clear that the Russians are trying their best to take out as much infrastructure as they can this summer and this fall to really and truly try to freeze the Ukrainians out, particularly in places like Kharkiv, and I believe Dnipro is next.
Certainly, there are some challenges for places like Kharkiv. It's only a few kilometers from the Russian border. Um, is it possible to defend aerial attacks in Kharkiv, given the proximity to Russia and Russia's launching platforms?
Oh, absolutely. They just need the systems in place. Heretofore, they just have not had the ability to cover every critical area, but it's coming.
Israel demonstrated recently, with the assistance of the United States, Great Britain, and France, that it is capable of using these defense shields, if you will. I think they had a 99% kill rate in bringing down aerial vehicles, whether they're missiles or drones, when they were attacked by Tehran. Will the same quality of weapon systems be made available to Ukraine in the current funding packages from Europe and the United States?
Oh, absolutely. The NASAM system that we have is what guards the White House, by the way, and that was placed around Kiev early on. And as Secretary Austin had said, it was a 100% success rate. And as we know, the Patriot is 100% success rate. There's some additional systems like the Hawk, which is it's a dated system, but still highly, highly effective to fast movers, especially. So, yeah, absolutely. I think the numbers will be there to protect the cities, which is what we need right now.
When those come online and Ukraine can put up a more robust defense of its cities, what do you see happening on the ground? Will it change Ukraine's defense or offensive posture on the ground?
The Ukrainian force structure is right now very strong. They've got 1 million men under arms. million soldiers, and that includes a lot of women, by the way. And 500,000 of them are combat capable, combat experienced, I should say. So when you add to that the proper amounts of artillery rounds that they need, and in addition to that, the ATACMS and F-16s, I think that they're going to more than hold their own. It's just a matter of time. It's going to take, weeks, I think, to get the proper flows going and some of the battle plans to counterattack. But they've held remarkably well with very, very little ammunition compared to the Russians. At one point, they were outgunned in artillery 10 rounds to 1. On average, it was about 7 to 1. And I talk to families who have people downrange. So I get this firsthand. Plus, I talk to, my military friends in various organizations in Ukraine. So I think that it's, as I said, not going to be a game changer, but it's going to be very positive.
I was in Turkey for the Antalya Diplomacy Forum 2 years ago when the full-scale invasion kicked off. And diplomats from around the world were telling me, I'm very senior diplomats, Ukraine has 3 to 10 days tops. Ukraine's defense and then the offensive that followed that recovered almost 1,000 settlements has performed in a superior nature to anybody's expectations. A lot of the credit must go to the ground forces. But they've been at it for more than 2 years now, a large section of them. To what extent is fatigue, morale, and factors like that going to start to play a role in Ukraine's readiness to continue to fight in what is essentially an existential fight?
Well, morale just went up 1,000% as of the Senate vote. I don't think morale is an issue. I'm told by people in political circles just a couple of days ago that recruiting is still robust. They're getting well paid for frontline duty, and we don't see an issue over the, I would say, short term to medium term. Now, when you talk about long term, and by that I mean 2 years and beyond, then you really need to see kill rates where the Ukrainians are killing Russians at a rate of at least 4 to 1 to force them to the table, because Russia would not be able to sustain that. If it's only a 2 to 1 or 3 to 1 kill rate, then this can go on for quite a while. Now, I think the support will be there, but it all depends on the election outcomes in November.
Are you talking about the possibility that Donald Trump may be elected?
He could be elected, and I think that would be very negative for Ukraine, very definitely.
Do you expect him to follow through with his, let's say, less than cordial relationship with NATO and reduce, if not terminate, the United States involvement in that the NATO alliance?
I don't think so. A couple of weeks ago, I would have said, I'm not sure. I'm very worried about that. But recently, especially this visit with President Duda of Poland and his remarks afterwards, and stating Poland's willingness to station nuclear weapons as needed, and that we would not succumb to nuclear blackmail. And I could see from his body language with President Trump, who they like one another very much, actually. My Polish contacts told me they get along very well. And Trump's speeches in Poland were always very positive. So I'm not worried about that. I am worried that even if he stays in NATO, that he could force Ukraine into accepting a very bad deal just to stop the hostilities, the murder, I should say.
Lavrov is saying that there is no sense in negotiating with Ukraine, that Zelensky is not a partner with whom Russia can negotiate. Then you have people like Putin who says that Ukraine isn't a real country. So if we start with the idea that Ukraine isn't a real country, is there any reality that an agreement with Russia without victory on the battlefield by Ukraine could possibly result in an enduring peace? Or is it the Russian outlook, as long as Putin's in charge at least, is that Ukraine is not a real country, it's Russian territory, and we must rebuild what will be a new Russian empire? What are your thoughts on that, if any?
I've seen this language recently from the Russian side about establishing a sanitary zone in Ukraine, which means that really they're just destroying everything that they can in front of them. But when you talk about establishing a sanitary zone, it implies that you're willing to stop somewhere. So I see that as a possibility, but it requires the Ukrainian army to forcibly stop them. And that's what needs. That's what we need these weapons packages for. So I see that it can be a negotiated end, but if and only if the Ukrainian army puts a full stop on the Russian army, and that way, then Russia can. They have to come to the table at some point.
When I was in Bakhmut a year and a half ago, at the beginning, there were Russian soldiers being taken prisoner or were recovered remains. And a lot of them were Wagner or regular military. 3 months later, we were seeing people with prison tattoos. There was a real degradation of the quality of soldiers fighting in Bakhmut. Tell me about the Russian soldiers fighting in Ukraine today. Are they well trained? Are they equipped? Are they capable on the battlefield? Or are they basically wearing boots and pushed out of training to meet the numbers needed on the battlefield for these horrendous meat assaults that result in high Russian casualties? What's your estimate there?
Well, I've read some interesting information from the UK's MOD, who I trust very much, actually. And it's interesting to me when they say that when Russia conscripts, let's say on average, 180,000 troops, only 150 of those will end up in uniform, I believe was the number. And of that number, 40,000 are truly combat capable. Now, as regards equipment, as I understand it, it's getting better. From guys in the military, they're finding, very sophisticated uniforms and, more fully equipped than the early on stuff that we both saw the first couple of years. So I think they're capable of putting 40,000 good troops in the field. And when it comes to armored vehicles, I just saw another interesting analysis done by a Western group that says they can produce about, I think it was 200 tanks per month. But and we're taking out almost that much per month. So once that shifts, and they can no longer, and I should be clear on that. These aren't brand new tanks, and they're bringing stuff out of stock. The two T-62s, and they're cannibalizing what they have left. And then there are some new tanks, T-90s, which are really just a minor upgraded version. They're not even significantly different at all from a T-72 M3. So there's they're replacing tanks, but not at a significantly increased rate. So over time, you can degrade their tank production, and that would be another aspect that forces them to the table, because when you can take out more of their hardware on the field than they can produce, it doesn't matter how many guys that they put in uniform.
Do you think that Russia's resources are so dwindled that they won't be able to ramp up production to meet a growing need to put modern battle tanks on the field and replenish their artillery and other systems that are going down in numbers nobody expected?
Well, I think they're doing everything they can. As I think I said already, the economy's on a total war footing. 40% of the budget being spent on the military, and I'm sure he can bump that up to 80% if he needed to. Are they capable at an industrial level? Do they have enough of the inputs and the technology? Are they able to skirt the sanctions to get the things that they need? I don't really know. But at this point, I do know that under current production, if given the right weaponry, which we're starting to do now, again, then we'll be able to take out more than they can produce on a monthly basis, and that is key, I believe.
If you were in charge, what would your objectives be at the macro level for the Russians right now? Is it to push to the Dnieper and demand a settlement by negotiation? Is it to reinforce the South, get the trains moving supplies, reinforce Crimea? What would you be doing right now?
Well, on the strategic level, I'm sure they're building that railroad that goes from Russia into Lugansk and Donetsk and Kherson Oblasts, because the Crimean supply line has been severely degraded. So on a logistical side, I would say that is a key priority, and it's logistics that wins wars, not tactics and strategy. But if you have the proper logistics, then I believe that Kharkiv is an objective for him. I think it's more personal than militarily significant. He wants to destroy that town. He expected that Kharkiv would welcome him at the beginning, and it was quite the opposite. But I think the real strategic push is from Donetsk to Dnieper. And they'll never go to the table. They'll never negotiate anything as long as they're winning. And they want to achieve a strategic breakthrough. And that strategic breakthrough, in my mind, as a commander, I want to get to Dnieper city, and I want to breach the river. Because once you are across the Dnieper, then immediately Mykolaiv is under threat and Odessa is under threat. And what they really want, what Putin has said, he's talked about for years and years, the concept of Catherine the Great's Novorossiya, which would be connecting the Russian, what is now Russia, with the Transnistria, getting Odessa back in their minds. And I'll make a comment on that in just a second. It's very eye-opening, actually. But you turn Ukraine into a rump state at that point. Once you cut off their sea access, which is vital to their commercial activity. But I wanted to mention the point about Odessa. I've met some Polish high-ranking religious Catholic folks who had met years ago before this invasion. Met some high-ranking Russian officials, government officials, in I think it was an official meeting of some sort in Warsaw, something to do with Minsk. And the comment was made by one of these very senior Russian officials that Odessa is ours and we want it back. And that says quite a lot, I think, about their intentions.
Well, it's interesting. I had an opportunity to directly ask the foreign minister of Russia, Mr. Lavrov, about Russia's intentions in Moldova.
One final question, yes.
Your Excellency, given the Congress of Deputies' request in Transnistria for assistance from Russia, what can we expect from Russia in terms of leadership to make sure this doesn't inflame into another request for annexation or further conflict?
Ну, вы знаете, наверное, вопросы нужно адресовать тем, кто...
Actually, what is the motivation?
He avoided answering the question directly and played the card that Russia, as always, is being mistreated and has a responsibility to protect its citizens. I want to ask about this now in reference to that Odessa comment. I speak to friends all over the Baltics, Poland, the Czech Republic. They all live in real fear that Russia's intentions won't be satiated with the vanquishment of Ukraine. They honestly believe that they are next in Russia's target list. Is that the sense you get from Ukraine's neighbors when you speak to people on the ground?
Oh, absolutely. And every high-ranking retired general that I know thinks the same way. And let me mention one more thing about Moldova. You said that Moldova requested assistance. Well, no, it was the Transnistria folks who had requested assistance. And I don't know if you saw it, I just read it today, that Moldovan security arrested some people at the airport coming from Russia carrying $1 million in cash, which we know what that was for, to pay people to instigate, not necessarily violence, but some sort of political agitation. Now, as to who's next after Moldova, which would be easy, it's definitely a Baltic. And I'll mention also another thing that people don't realize in the West, because they can't really follow Russian media and what's going on inside Russian media. That is why relations with Ukrainian intelligence and just Ukrainian people who pay attention to what's going on inside of Russia. There's a new Russian army song that starts off, I believe, or it has the words in it that we are effing NATO. So the objective, it's not just to reconstitute the Soviet Union in the East, to take back the Baltics, to take back Ukraine and Moldova, but it's to emasculate, to break NATO. That's what he wants to do, but it's not going to happen. Poland has made it clear, and I'm more and more confident now that at least Trump will not abandon NATO. Trump would not unilaterally be able to take us out of NATO. That's impossible. But as commander-in-chief, he certainly could say no to the military, that we will not do this or we will not do that. The Article 5 is not a done deal, so to speak.
Last time we were together, I think we had a conversation when this all started in 2014. Putin could have been said to have had very good relations with possibly a third, if not just a bit higher, of the Ukrainian parliament, the Rada. In the border countries, there was a significant Russian influence still. NATO had gone into the slumber mode, literally rusting before our eyes. Then Russia invades Donbass. In 2022, there's a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. They refuse to relinquish their occupation of Crimea. They're staging illegal and unconscionable attempts to annex territory in Ukraine, as they did in Georgia and Moldova. Putin's lost a great deal of his influence by this very aggressive policy. Can he back down and stay in office? What's the thinking that you have or what you're hearing in Ukraine?
Well, he'll never back down. Whatever he decides to do, whatever Russia decides to do, they'll declare it as mission accomplished. How he gets to that point, I'm not sure. But as I said, when he starts talking about establishing a sanitary zone in Ukraine, that implies a demilitarized zone. So they're thinking about a settlement. It's just a matter of how and when. But again, it all depends on the success of the Ukrainian military this summer and fall.
When President Zelensky relieved General Zaluzhny, who had been the face man for Ukraine's war effort, there was a lot of consternation in the West that his replacement wouldn't be as popular. How are things on the ground now? Do the troops have confidence in their military command? How has he handled his last few months as commanding Ukrainian armed forces? What do you see as the nation's mood about confidence in their military today?
Well, they lost a lot of confidence there at the beginning for sure, because Zaluzhny is well respected, well liked. He's a 21st century military man. Syrskyi being Russian, and his parents, by the way, are alive and living in Russia. It's, it kind of rankles people, and maybe it makes him a security risk. I don't know. But he was also quite a defensive fighter, which is what Ukraine needed at that point. And he did replace a lot of these senior guys that really are just, they're dinosaurs. They really did need to go. And now what I'm seeing is a lot of younger guys that have been lieutenant colonels and colonels being bumped up to the general officer level in all of the services, National Guard, Special Operations, Regular Army, and so on. So I think there's definitely positive movement there. I think the military is still, from the polls that I've seen inside Ukraine, by far the highest respected institution in the country, well more than the politicians, as in most countries, at least in the United States, it's that way as well.
Well, I have to tell you, I have great respect for General Syrskyi. I had been with the Sturm Special Purpose Marines Special Ops community in the early days of the war, fighting in Kiev and Irpin, Bucha. I have to tell you, Syrskyi's defense of Kiev, it was textbook. It was masterful. And for all the comments that he was trained as a soldier in Moscow, he has that Soviet mindset, not the more Western military education attributed to Zaluzhny. His ability to adapt, to go on the offensive when necessary, defensive when required, and his elevation of those officers you were talking about to the general ranks, I think shows him to be quite a dynamic officer. And I think that he will prove himself over time. And I think the fact that the Russians haven't gone further over the last 3 to 4 months is in large part due to his leadership. Sam, we're coming to the close of the program. I want to get your general thoughts. What's in store for the next 3 months and 6 months on the battlefield, and for the civilians in Ukraine who have paid such a high price being targeted by Russian aerial attacks?
I expect that Russia is going to do everything that they can in terms of using missile attacks against civilian infrastructure and logistics. They are going to be hunting for these support bases where all of this new support is coming in. And it's going to be a very, very hot summer, a very dangerous summer. I think that they will shift. I hope they'll shift away from the civilian targets I don't think they have, well, I know they don't have unlimited missile resources, but their targeting is going to change, most definitely. And again, it all depends on getting that support to the front lines as quickly as possible. And I trust that the Ukrainians, they use it very, very well, as the Pentagon said early on in this invasion. On a scale of 1 to 10, they rate Ukraine's use of our weaponry as a 12, and it's true. But it's going to depend a lot on their ability to protect those logistics that are flowing in, and then use them effectively over the summer. And I can't really project more than the fall, but my expectation is that they'll, especially when the F-16s get in, and we haven't talked about that, and we're running out of time, but I expect that once they have the full complement of everything that they need, that things on the ground are going to get very, very difficult for the Russian army. And we should see a bit of pushback and some recovery of territory by the fall. And it may be the right time to that Russia will finally come to the table and propose something logical.
Sam, I want to talk to you about you for a minute. I talked a little bit about you being a West Point graduate, class of 81. What was your military career? Were you branched infantry, artillery, intelligence? What was your background?
I was branched in military intelligence. And after my officer training, basic training, I went to Korea for a couple of years, 1 year on the DMZ. And right after that, I went straight to Germany, where I was in the 3rd Armored Division for nearly 6 years. 2 of those years with 1st Brigade, with, we called it the German border defense. And for another few years after that, I was in the military intelligence battalion. My troops were all German and Russian linguists, and I had electronic warfare specialists that worked for me as well. And then my last job was as an assistant S2 of 1st Brigade, S2 being intel officer in the Gulf War. After that, I mean, the wall fell, and I went to business school at University of Michigan, and went back to Germany actually in 1992, where I got into international banking, trade finance, and I worked. My responsibility was the former Soviet Union. Most of my time was spent in Ukraine, where I made a lot of friends in the banking industry. But I also did a number of deals in Russia, particularly in the Russian oil sector. Then in 2000, I took a job with it's called the Export-Import Bank of the United States. It's a government agency that finances big American export deals. And again, I was given a former Soviet Union portfolio, and most of that at the beginning especially was Russian oil field business. But after 9/11, I wanted to come back in the Army, and well, they didn't need me until 2005. I did go back on active duty with Special Operations Command, first of all, and was in counterterrorism finance. But then I started volunteering for duty in Afghanistan, which was my passion. I ended up working for CENTCOM as well, and U.S. Army Europe, although they sent me again to Afghanistan. I volunteered, they didn't send me. And my last job there was with Defense Intelligence Agency as their number 2. We had a footprint of about 500 folks, 90% civilian, 10% military. So they had me as the military colonel, as the deputy. And then finally, after I did a total of 36 months in Afghanistan. And then my last job before retirement was in the Pentagon, the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, working with it was special operations intelligence issues. And I did that for a year and retired finally in March of 2014.
SOCOM, DIA, Afghanistan. You've had quite a career. I want to thank you for your service. It certainly explains why you speak so intelligently and eloquently on these issues. I want to thank you for your time. But before we go, I want to ask about your volunteer work now. I know that you live in the home of a former classmate um, who was one of the first Americans who gave their life in the defense of Ukraine. Tell me about Mark.
Yeah, he was the first, and we were great friends. And he was working in the banking industry in Kiev as I was, and we lived right around the corner from one another for about 3 years. But when I went back into the military, and after Crimea, Mark joined. He took Ukrainian citizenship and joined the Ukrainian National Guard as a private, which he had to do by U.S. law. He couldn't take a commission as an officer, or he would lose his U.S. citizenship, actually. So he went in as a private, and he was serving in the Donbass. It was really nothing more than crowd control. There were some protests, this and that were stoked by the Russians. But when the Russians did come in with regular forces, his company was hit by a regiment of Russians, regular soldiers, and he was killed. He received, I think it was the second highest award from the Ukrainian military. I forget the name of it. But I read the citation, and I met the guys that were in his unit, and it was easily a Distinguished Service Cross. He under fire. He had crossed a bridge over the railroad tracks there in Ilovaisk and retrieved two wounded guys under fire, and then they took some incoming, and he dove on one fellow soldier, his buddy, to protect him from shrapnel. And it was either artillery or an RPG that hit one of those aluminum telephone poles that splintered, and he took a lot of shrapnel in the back, and he didn't last long.
Well, I know that must have been a grave loss for you, but it sounds like he performed in the highest traditions of the military. And his devotion to saving his comrades is nothing short of admirable. Sam, as a last point, I want to ask about how your experience with Mark and living in Ukraine extended into the work you're doing today with wounded veterans. Give me a plug for your organization and tell me about the work that you're doing.
Right. Well, yeah, I came back as quickly as I could. I got here in March 13th. I was actually on vacation in Hawaii, but I started calling friends. And one friend, his wife is blind from type 2 diabetes and on dialysis, and they had an 8-year-old daughter, and they lived right next to Irpin. And I said, "You've got to get out of there. I'll meet you in Ukraine." So I flew back to Italy, where I was living at the time. I drove 24 hours to get to Chernivtsi, where I met them. And after some time, I got them out of Ukraine. Then I went back and worked for an organization delivering IFACs near the front lines, which was very gratifying. But now I've transitioned into, as you mentioned, support for wounded veterans. And right now, I think the priority is with the traumatic brain injured. Amputees are also an enormous problem. The last figures I saw last fall, which were unofficial and were just mentioned to me privately, was that they were getting 1,000 patients per month needing prosthetics. I've seen guys that were triple amputees. And 1,000 per month, but only 200 per month can be managed in the Ukrainian healthcare system, and another 100 per month from external organizations, like one of the ones that I represent. But prosthetics can be dealt with over time, whereas traumatic brain injury cannot. Those folks have to be, they need to get therapy right away, or they will be permanently in that near vegetative state. Now, that's very expensive. It's the best price that we can find at state-of-the-art hospitals is about $2,000 per month, dollars per month. So it's an enormous fundraising challenge, and the organization I work for is called Veteran Coalition International. Our website is vetcoa, vetcoa.org, and we have a special donation tab for Ukraine only. But our mission is we're gathering like-minded organizations throughout NATO countries to assist in this type of support. And yeah, it's critical for the traumatic brain injured right now.
Well, Sam, let me compliment you on that work. We'll put up the website and let people know how they can donate to make a difference. But I do want to reiterate your point. Traumatic brain injuries, TBIs, how important it is to get them active thinking and retraining their brain very early. Critical work. Thank you and your peers for tackling that, for all that you do in the humanitarian sector. I want you to stay safe. Keep my number. I hope to talk to you again soon. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you very much for the time and the opportunity. Take care.